Okay, today we're going to look at Letters from Yorkshire, the poem by Maura Dooley. We're going to be looking at how the poem focuses on the working lives of the two people in the poem, one who farms the land and the other who is a journalist. They are separated physically and communicate from a distance, but we are still looking at a poem about sort of a romantic relationship to a degree. So I want you to take a few moments and think about these questions. I want to think about the environments that are described in the poem. Um, we've got a farm environment, an outdoor environment, and we've got an indoor office type environment. So I want us to think about the associations here. What do we associate with them? What are the advantages and disadvantages of each working environment? How might one person feel about the other working environment? Now, we might associate working outdoors with a sense of freedom, a sense of being connected to nature. In terms of viewing this working life positively, people often think about this type of living as rewarding for a number of reasons, including that by working with the earth, you're providing for others' essential needs by creating food, etc. You're sort of nourishing others, and you get to see what you've sowed into the earth grow and become something bigger and more important to society. It's a chance to nurture something and make a positive contribution. We need to think about how journalism compares or contrasts to that. We might think how that physical environment is very different from an outdoor environment. An office is quite enclosed, it's full of man-made materials like computers, phones, in contrast to the very natural world of the other environment. Even noises in an office are man-made, so rather than the sounds of nature that a farmer might experience, we've got telephones going, computers clicking, binging. Working in journalism can be associated with a sense of excitement and purpose, but it can also be quite stressful and have tight deadlines. Maybe people might be working on sort of troubling stories or stories that don't feel significant or important. So you need to think about how both of these people in the poem might think about those other environments. Have a look here now. There's a couple of words used in the poem that you might not be familiar with. So I've given you a couple of options for what they might mean. You might want to have a look at the poem and see if you can determine what each of these might be based on looking at the place in the poem. Feel free to pause the PowerPoint before moving on so you can think about the answers. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to do that. A lapwing is in fact a bird often found near farms, surprise, surprise. And a water butt is a small tank that collects rainwater, something that would be really useful in a farm because it will help to sort of recycle that water. Okay, so just a couple of terms you might have been unfamiliar with. This will give you a chance so you know what they mean and what they are referring to. Okay, moving on. I'd like to look at the opening verse. Now here, what I want you to think about is the fact that the poet locates us in time with a reference to February. So think about how bleak and cold that time of year would be. And he, the he in the poem that we hear about in this first verse, is made active through the verbs digging and planting. We see this as a kind of challenging task in the hard earth, digging up in the middle of winter. But it shows the kind of preparations that have to be made for a time in the future when those efforts will be rewarded and enjoyed. Okay, but we've also got some key moment of enjoyment during that difficult task when the focus shifts from the digging to the arrival of the lapwings. And immediately after the return, the he in the poem comes indoors. And they come indoors to write to the speaker, the poetic voice that we're hearing. So it seems as if the letter was inspired by nature and maybe suggests the first point of connection between the two people in the poem, a shared interest between the couple, a love of nature, an interest in nature. Despite the joy that the arrival of the lapwing brings, and we can see that joy coming through the sort of swift response to come in and writing a letter, we are also reminded of the sort of the simultaneous hardships of working outside, and we can see that through the singing knuckles of the farmer. which indicates the kind of physical pain and discomfort brought about through the cold and the physicality of the work. But perhaps there's also a different tone in this first verse. Maybe we can detect a tone of pride, suggested by the phrase, "write to me." The speaker takes comfort and joy from the fact that he was thinking of her at this joyful time, wanting to share the experience of nature with her. And so here we begin to see the simple yet quite intimate relationship that seems to exist between them. Okay, moving on to verse 2. The enjambment across the verses is worth paying attention to because it occurs throughout the poem, and it seems to hint at the connectedness of the couple despite the physical distance. The idea that just like the enjambment transcends verses, so does their relationship transcend kind of separate places. Notice how his cold hands become red and warm when he returns inside, as if the act of writing to her is maybe filling him with a kind of renewed life and warmth. Maybe that knowledge that she will appreciate this glimpse into the natural world that she's missing in her city-based office. So again, show that thoughtfulness that he has for her, that care he has for her. And maybe this is reinforced when she imagines him out there, seeing the cold seasons. While she recognises it is cold, the shift of the focus through the alliterative phrase, seeing the seasons, we see that perhaps there is a tone of longing from the speaker in the poem, as if she's imagining how wonderful it might be to sort of be able to experience the season changing in this intimate way, which is not part of her everyday experience, but part of this other person's who's writing letters to her. Now, the middle line in this verse, which I've highlighted already, is really interesting. She declares that, this letter writing, this connectedness, it's not romance. And I wonder if we think that that's true. The immersion in nature, the kind of involvement in nature and the writing and the receiving of the letter, isn't there something sort of romantic in those things? Or is the poet emphasising that kind of huge romantic gestures aren't really necessary or wanted in their relationship? And we begin to question, is there something more meaningful in the sort of simplicity of their relationship, the connectedness of their shared joy over something like nature? Maybe that's what's more important than any big romantic gestures. Okay, moving on to verse 3. Again, enjambment is used, so again reminding us of their continued connectedness. Right, the opening word here, turning, combined with me, really turns our attention to the speaker as they compare their life to that of the he in the poem. The alliteration of heartful of headlines places her in contrast to the seeing of seasons that we had in the previous verse. The use of the heartful maybe suggests she is passionate about her profession, that she takes great care over it. Although her job does provide a contrast to the seeing of the seasons, which she seems to regard with longing, maybe even with regret. The next line might support this. The verb feeding, we see here, it makes us think about nature, but she's referring to words and they are going onto a blank screen. So it's possibly suggesting that maybe there's a sort of an emptiness in what she's doing. Maybe it's a little bit lacking in meaning. Maybe she sees there's something artificial about her process of work compared to the him in the poem. Maybe there's a sense that she regrets that. The rhetorical question at the end of the verse really makes us think about a tone, really creates sort of a tone of reflection here, where the questioning of what is real could be connected to her feeding the words onto the screen. For the speaker, there's no sense of maybe the impact of her words, the impact of her work. She's not at the other end receiving it, unlike the he who is rewarded for his efforts with crops that grow, etc. So that contrast between their two lifestyles is really being brought out for us. and making the speaker think about things. So if we look at the next verse, the speaker here, we see that the relationship that they have with the person in the farm maybe helps them to reflect on their own life and question their own life choices. The relationship seems to make her maybe yearn or long for something different, something closer to what he has. This implies that they are close, and is echoed by the opening of the in the next line of the verb, where she asserts that she knows how he would answer the question. The listing of the two challenging and laborious tasks of breaking ice and clearing the path through the snow suggests that he doesn't romanticize his work, idealize it, make it sound perfect, and maybe it suggests that she shouldn't either. So while she questions her place and her role and her life choices, she's recognizing that he, the farmer, doesn't see his life choices in an idealized way. And that maybe makes her pause more carefully. She addresses him directly through the use of the word still. It's you who sends me word of that other world. Is she pointing out that his letters are what makes her long for that change, for something different? The description of other world is perhaps romantic, suggesting something unknown, exciting, striking in how different it is from the life that she has. That idea is furthered in the final verse through the metaphor of pouring air and light into the envelope. There is a sense of something almost magical in his letters. Light and air places the focus on the outdoors and nature. In terms of the relationship, can we determine from this that both he and his place that he has in Yorkshire is desirable, something she wants, something she longs for, and not just the place, but him as well? They're kind of connected so closely that she wants both that life and him in that life. And this is maybe kind of furthered or compounded, made more strong by their souls tapping out messages. The souls, the use of that word suggests perhaps their letters are coming from a very meaningful and important place, a place of truth perhaps. So the connection that they have is a very truthful and meaningful one. The physical distance, though, is emphasised through the idea of watching the same news in different houses. That their distance is very much emphasised there. Also emphasised through the icy miles that perhaps creates a distance. But the suggestion in this final verse is that their souls are able to overcome the distance, possibly suggesting their sort of relationship transcends, kind of goes beyond the physical to something more spiritual and meaningful. So in comparison to other relationships we've seen in this collection, there may be a physical distance, but is this a poem where we see one of the greatest emotional and psychological and spiritual connections? That's definitely something to think about when considering the comparisons between this poem and other poems. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a few ideas. And I think the other thing to think about with this poem is the way in which sometimes we focus on what's happening in his world and sometimes we're drawn to what's happening in her world. And that's a kind of something to look at structurally. So hopefully you found that interesting. Use these ideas plus your own notes and ideas to get an overall understanding of the poem.